What's quacking, guys? It's the TheDuckChris, and I'm back today for another ramble after a bit of a break. But luckily, we have lots to talk about today. Start off with the Raids 3 rewards, my thoughts on it, and I got a couple other things to touch on as well. In the background, I'm going to be doing some barrows on the group Iron Man, which I haven't done too much except for crab on in a while, so it should be somewhat interesting. Um, yeah, let's dive into it. Raids 3 rewards. I'm glad they're finally out. Looks very interesting. Off the top, I think not a lot of people are talking about the range armor because it was kind of expected. But I just wanted to kind of bring up how insane it's going to be. Like, I don't know if people have been trying out best in slot since Next dropped, but Tebow gains multiple max hits with the Vambraces, especially on task, and that's just a 2% damage buff. And the armor's going to be 6% without the helmet, 8% with the helmet, so 6% on task. That's like 3 more Vambraces on top of what we already have. I'm definitely expecting some brand new world records for Inferno, for Hydra, all sorts of cool stuff. I think it's going to be really good. And because of that, probably keep a high price for a long time. The helmet also, it's nice that the helmet like still gets some range strength because Armor Helm is like really not that useful right now. Considering it's just accuracy, and a lot of times we're using other helmets anyway when we use multiple styles or on task. But definitely good to see it getting some love. And as I said, 2%, definitely not insignificant. The wand and the ward, I like how in the flavor they describe it as like 2 different pieces of kind of a same package, where like the wand is Tumekens and the ward is Elidinus's. Geez, that's a tongue twister. But it's kind of cool that like you're gonna need both to really get the new best in slot mage setup. With the 5% from the ward and then the mass damage from the wand. So that's pretty interesting. I think that the wand, I like the special effects it has per spellbook. I don't know how useful they'll be, like in terms of like making it this thing that everyone needs to have. I think it's just more of a cherry on top. But the thing is, like, people are not excited about the damage because it's hard to put it into perspective. By the time it gets in game, it will have that wow factor. Everyone will be like, oh my gosh, like look how fast the kills are when you're using this wand. But we can't do that yet, so it's really not like it's not hitting that hard for everyone yet. So they threw this little kind of bonus effect on there to make it more interesting, which is cool. I think it's good. I think the Arceus one is kind of bad because it'll be every 8 ticks you're losing 3 extra prayer points, and people really don't. I think that's a lot. Even in a place like Chambers where we have prayer renewals, like you really don't want that much prayer drop. So maybe adjust that to 2 or 1 point instead of 3. But I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. Obviously, that's something you can adjust in post if it ends up being that bad. The ward, I think, there's not too much to say about it except that I do see people talking about how it could be another Pegasian scenario. But the thing is, we don't know what the drop rate is. So the drop rate for Pegasian Crystal, you can do for sure at least 50 to 51 kills at Serb per hour, probably more. So it's 10 hours for a Pegasian Crystal, and definitely more so for Ranger Boots, and more people do Serb than Camp Med Clues. And that's like part of why Pegasians are the way they are. But I do agree that with the secondary item being the Arcane, and the Arcane being pretty rare at 1,000 corp kills or 1170, whatever it is. it's something to think about in terms of how to combine the items and make sure that the ward is still valuable. But I do think that if it's T-bow drop rate or similar, the mega rares at Chambers for raids 3 could be the ward and the wand, as they're both similarly powerful in terms of like really helping mage take that next step in DPS. If it's a mega rare and there's already a ton of arcanes around, it's still going to be the more valuable component. So that's something to think about. The ring is probably the thing I have the least comments on, just because it's very basic. Like, I understand that it's meant to be niche. Fine, I'll just pray. It's meant to be niche, and that's why it's not really starting out as something that's clearly OP or clearly very strong, but something that we'll just have to find uses for later. But I think it could use maybe an extra little something. The B ring is 2 max hits, and even if you spec twice as often, it's not going to be worth it at most places. For melee at least. For range, maybe, it might be okay. But definitely I think that it could use some more love. The Fang is still bad, and there's been a good amount of discussion over this. Nothing. And I think that the discussion has been kind of controversial in some places in terms of what people think the Fang should be, what people think makes a good drop from raids and a good item in general. I understand that some people might want the Fang to just be something that is not best in slot, but is like a fun option. But it won't even really be that right now. As far as I'm seeing, it's the only place where I found that it's noticeably better than current best in slot is Nex, and even then, not by a lot. Everywhere else, it's like very similar to existing best in slots. It's a tiny bit better at Corp in teams, and like not really any better than Spear for solo. So is that going to make it worth buying? Like, not really. And I understand that, like, people have their own calcs, people have their own ideas, and also the idea that the calcs are not necessarily going to show everything in terms of what the weapon will feel like, because of the min-max damage function will cut off a lot of the overkill. But the thing is that it needs to be at least a good option. And right now, there's just no point in buying it. It's almost like, like the rapier or the abyssal dagger. It's like an item that you could buy, sure, but there's just better options. Now the rapier, like, since the blade became expensive, the rapier is now good again because it's the cheapest option for its tier. But there was a while where the blade was just 100% better, and there was no reason to buy the rapier at all. And I think that's what the Fang will be pretty much in this state. It'll just be 100% worse than any existing option, and the only reason you would ever buy it is if you don't have any existing options and maybe you just want to try it out. My calcs, as I said, showed not worth using on Corp, really. Barely worth using on Nex if you use melee, but no one's really using melee anymore because it's kind of shit. And only like somewhat better than rapier on other high defense monsters such as Groudor, but Scythe is still better. And I understand, so their stated intention was that it was supposed to be a weapon. Where are we going? It was supposed to be a weapon that works well on high defense monsters, but not as well on lower defense monsters. And that's kind of similar to the Chaotic Longsword in the pre-EOC, where it was, the rapier was technically better in terms of your average DPS, but the Longsword really excelled at those bosses. because it would kind of hit through the defense. So one way that you could do that is you could just get a little more creative with this. So if that's truly your aim, maybe you have something where instead of hitting off of their melee defense, maybe this weapon rolls off of their range defense or their magic defense. That way you can have a monster like Bear Rose, perhaps, that, is typically maged. But with this weapon, with the Fang, you could melee it, and it hits really well. It hits like you're using a mage weapon. I can't really think of another boss that has that kind of effect. Maybe, if you're hitting with range, maybe like, I don't know. There's some bosses in raids that, are better against raids. Range, maybe a Vanguard, something like that. Or, it's just one example in terms of things that encourage you to use a style that isn't melee, but then you can break through that with this weapon. Or you could just have a straight up kind of ignore defense effect, like with the Brimstone Ring, where it ignores a percentage of the opponent's defense. Maybe you could have that with this weapon as a passive effect, like it ignores 20% of your opponent's defense or more, and it wouldn't necessarily be, like a straight, then you wouldn't have to have a straight accuracy number like plus 300 melee attack, because that's a bit silly, but you would have this effect that lets you ignore the defense. There's other ideas that are a bit more off concept in terms of turning this into a weapon that is actually fun to use and effective and worth buying. But those are kind of the only ideas I could think of that are on concept, that fit what Jagex want it to be. But I think that it's worth mentioning also that one of the problems with what Jagex wants it to be, a somewhat slower weapon that does consistent damage, like that's the Scythe. The Scythe does that. It's 5 tick. It has 3 different hits, so it really, hits through to the defense more often than you would think. But it doesn't have the same kind of max hit potential that something like a rapier or lance does, where all of its hit is in one roll. It's more about consistent damage over a long time. So I wonder, why would you choose the Fang to be something like that when we already have the Scythe to do it? And I guess one answer is that they want it to be stab, and so it's a bit different. But I still think that it's a bit too much of a crowded niche already. So that's something to think about. Overall, I think that this raid's going to be really cool. Once you get a purple, I like to think about it this way. Like, once you're doing raids 3, let's say it's day 1 or even just the first week. And, if you're a main, obviously, like, every item is going to be expensive. You're hoping it's one of the ones that's straight up best in slot instead of the niche ones. But overall, like, no matter who you are, like, when you get a purple from this raid, it's going to be very exciting. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, it could be a Masori armor piece. It could be, it could be the wand or the shield, which are both incredible. And then the other awards, like, they're not as good, but they're still, going to be useful and going to carry some value. So going to be pretty interesting. I'm really looking forward to this raid. I think it's going to be really fun. And yeah, the rewards look great. In terms of some other things to talk about, it's, a good time in the community to talk about a variety of things, because we just had a QOL poll, and there's a lot of stuff coming up, like the rune crafting mini game, and there's going to be a skilling update later this year to be discussed. So it's kind of, there's a lot going on. Unfortunately, the Raids 3 talk has kind of disrupted all of that. So I think I'm just going to leave this ramble as a Raids 3 discussion. And maybe I'll put on another one later this week or after if I get some more to talk about in terms of what else is going on. Leagues is ending. It's looking like what I predicted in terms of a lot of people quitting, a lot of people dying off, and those extra 2 weeks being kind of a waste of time for most people. So that's kind of too bad, but can't say we didn't predict it. But yeah, definitely a good time to be getting back into the game and looking forward to the year's updates to come. And until then, I guess I'll just leave it off. So yeah, leave a like, subscribe if you want, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.